Welcome to another edition of the Pure Signal podcast, where we bring you the latest in technology, AI, machine learning, and more to give you strategic insights focused for your business to send it to infinity and beyond. I'm Ryan Medellin, Digital Strategy and Delivery Manager here at Credera, along with our North American CEO, Kevin Erickson, and our Chief of Innovation, Jake Carter. Gentlemen, sorry for the Buzz Lightyear reference. I've been watching Toy Story nonstop for the past week.
That's right. Jake's wife worked on that movie, so she was very happy when she was at Pixar, so it's all good. It's all in the family.
It's a little nod to her then.
That's right.
He got his first Buzz Lightyear, and we were watching it, and he was holding it up to the TV, and he's like, same. I'm like, yeah, bud.
Does it fly? The wings come out?
The wings come out. I don't think the functionality on the Buzz Lightyear has changed since I got my first when I was a kid. It's the button for the wings. You have the little laser, and the plastic head cover.
Yep. And the same.
Inevitably broke within a week of him having it because he kept putting it up and down.
It's planned obsolescence. I mean, it's been working for toy manufacturers for the start of time. So.
Or in our house, Buzz Lightyear goes into the bathtub, and then obsolescence happens like about an hour after you get it.
Yeah, that's
a battle, keeping the electric toys out of the bath. Yeah, I've learned that in parenthood.
Your family respects Marvel, not anything that's Pixar, much to your wife's chagrin.
There you go.
Well, we've spent past couple episodes really shaping up what we're going to call the finale of this little mini series that we're doing on the pod, which is we got into the planning approach with AI. How does that look in the new year? We got into getting buy-in for those projects that you potentially want to put on your roadmap. And then today, we're really going to look at, in a world where everybody seems to be doing the same thing and using a lot of the same technology, how do you stand out? And I think this is the perfect audience for that. And I think one of the first things that we want to dive into is, in a world where it seems like everything you see is just feed AI into the company. Just do it, right? The Nike method. Just do it. Start doing it. Start now. Where do you find the nuance of how to be different? And I think that in this case is a good thing, right? That's where you get your innovators, the ones who think differently. And we've touched on those topics a little bit, but this is meant to go more in depth on that. So I'll just open it up to y'all, and then we'll kind of go through some topics. Just initial thoughts on that.
Well, maybe a little more tee up, just at least some fodder as I was thinking about this. And again, I was on PTO last week as well. So I had little cobwebs here knocking them out this morning. But I think it's intriguing with OpenAI's browser launch. You've got, I think Friday was market cap all-time high. You've got, still seeing this convergence a bit of what is going to be the models versus the hyperscalers. I think there's a growing concern just of the frothiness of just really where the technology sector is in general. So I mean, I think it's an interesting topic for me this morning as we're thinking about, well, where are we at in the hype cycle of sorts for AI in terms of task versus solution versus whatever, but in the broader macro environment of, I think many people are asking themselves kind of where is this going to go? And so that's not necessarily a point to that, but just a little bit more even for us to begin discussion. But I'd be curious some of your initial thoughts.
No, that's been top of mind for me. We could do a whole discussion on, hey, are we in a bubble? What is the nature of the bubble? But more germane to this topic, Ryan, when you say, everyone's doing AI, my immediate thought was, what do we mean by that? Meaning there's lots of different ways you could interpret that. Do we mean, are you looking at adoption of AI within companies? Are you looking at just the amount of money that is being invested in AI, specifically like AI startups? Are you looking at overall AI spend? Now, they might all get you to the same place, but that was my initial thought.
Well, I'd go even broader. I mean, even in personal life, right? It seems like most conversations, it eventually gets to AI at some point. There was a commercial I saw during the NFL games this week, and it was a guy walking into a convenience store, and it was the cashier saying, "Hey, how's your day going?" And he stops, looks at his phone, plugs in, "Somebody asked me how my day is going. How should I respond?" And it's, the casual, "Oh, maybe something soft like 'it's going well. How about you?" So like even That's broader, funny. When I say everyone, I mean, obviously we're going to focus on business things here, but everyone's doing it in some form or fashion and has access to the tools one way or another.
It has entered the zeitgeist.
Yes. I mean, it's like when Google, right? Just Google it. Well, now it's just AI it.
Interesting about the browser. I mean, the fact that the lines are really blurring. And if we go from that perspective, Ryan, just in the context of like, society? Is it here? Is it being used every single day? I mean, just even like you go your classic, like just Google it. The line between Google and AI at this point is there is no line. I mean, it's it's a very much of an interesting element of that. But I do think from a company's perspective, again, we've at the end of this kind of last few sessions, plus also, still the timeliness of, nearing the, in the fourth quarter, looking at next year, looking at investments and cycles. I do think most of the companies, I think our clients, I mean, everyone's using it in every day and everything that we use it. Obviously in the professional service world, they expect us to be using that. So, that when I look at, this is not the year in review yet, but that's a shift, I think, from the beginning of the year that, just the full on expectation of usage. But I'm most excited about, and this is a theme that I've said and shared before, but I'm just really excited about the change from the task driven acceleration to much more systematic change. And what companies, I read several books, mostly fun books last week, but continuing reading on these themes. I just think that there's a real opportunity for companies right now to revisit how they do things. And I think the amount of change we're going to see on that in the next year is going to be, I think, start to really reveal who's going to win or lose. But, I think companies are going to have to move beyond task acceleration into much more broader change.
Yeah, and I think that's where it starts, right? And then it's like, where does it go from there? And that's where we kind of start thinking about ways of differentiation, value prop, that, companies should be addressing now.
Well, I mean, actually, I'm going to bounce it back over to you and stuff. I mean, we talked about this a little bit before too, but I guess I'd still be curious from an innovation perspective, how do you address kind of these next steps of change that we're seeing and asking, probably in a planning cycles when companies are thinking about their internal processes a bit more than, and also their customers, but I think probably a lot of it's internal. I mean, I guess, how do you think about it from an innovative perspective and asking our customer and clients to be able to address this?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can go there. My prevailing thought is this, and I do realize the irony of me saying this as the innovation guy in the room. You've heard the saying, the more things change, the more they stay the same. I think this is a prime example. What I mean by that is, we've got all of this newness that's happening with AI, but if you look at where is it going wrong versus where is it working, it's the same fundamentals that we've seen, in every big innovation cycle. So my answer to your question when you're asking, hey, how are you thinking about this, is when I was trying to think for this discussion of where is AI not working for companies as part of where can they find their value differentiators. We had that old piece on the reasons that innovation fails. It's all the same reasons. So, companies thinking about, hey, how should they be thinking about this? It's the same stuff. And what I mean by that, I think in that piece we had, innovation goes wrong when you start with the technology, not the problem. Innovation goes wrong when you fall in love with your idea and, the confirmation bias of you ignore all evidence to the contrary. Innovation goes wrong when you move wholesale to trying to make the thing perfect before you figure out if it's working. And innovation goes wrong when you do it, one off of, I've got the brilliant idea, I'm going to go pursue it, as opposed to trying to create some more systematic approach. I think all of us are true with AI. So that's what I was wrestling with this morning.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, well, I'm just kind of thinking through that, plus thinking through, I know we'll talk about reshuffle at some other future date, but I mean, taking that thoughts, and one of the things that was interesting at the author at the end of reshuffle was kind of referencing, three different, sports. We'll talk about sports on a Monday morning after a big sports weekend here. The construct of, Tiger Woods' emergence. The end result to that, after everyone tried to get better, healthier physically, was they changed courses. Right? They literally changed the design of the courses to be able to change that. Talk about Stephen Curry, pretend, so the end of his career here, enjoy him where he has him, arguably the best shooter ever in history of basketball, changed the game of basketball, right? The fundamental way teams view 3-pointers and how that plays out. You think about the classic line of tribute to Gretzky, I skate to where the puck is going. I think that's probably been the business mantra for many companies, and I actually think it's flawed. Where in this case, it's not about where's the puck going. We need to be thinking more like Curry and Woods, like what's going to change in the game. how do we actually fundamentally change it to be different? What I love about Curry is, when he came out, they thought they didn't know if he'd be successful as an NBA player because he didn't play the game. He was too small and different elements of that. And to think now, almost a generation later, I think he's 18 years or something like that in the league. He's changed the game. And so I think that's how I would ask companies to be thinking about it right now. Is like, how do you do things differently? Where is your competitors going to go? What's going to change? Where could you jump? What I love about right now, I think it creates competitive advantage for smaller or non-entrenched firms in ways that it never, at least I think you almost have to go back to the other part, regarding another theme, and I'll pause, let y'all respond, is like, I think I'm still trying to figure out, I believe that, patterns reemerge, and, you can't necessarily predict the future by looking at the past. But, when I look at technical change, cloud was an acceleration task, right? We're still seeing that. You're seeing that now with AI and the hyperscalers, right? We're continuing to just accelerate any type of innovation that occurs associated in that side becomes democratized, and it's race to the bottom. Mobile maybe changed some of that, but some similar, right? Maybe you have to go back to the PC. I don't know, but like where did companies fundamentally change the way they did business? And it's probably somewhere, I would think, that you probably could go back to early internet, early mobile. That clearly opened up the different ability to understand customers and created, no one knew what digital even meant before that time frame. But I think that's the way I think companies should be thinking about it. Like, how did your business change in those moments? And how do you interact with your customer, your supply chain? And that's the things that the easy, I think, acceleration winnings have happened. And maybe easy is the wrong term. It took 36 months or so for us to get here. But I think now it's going to be the bold that think about it differently, and companies and boards that invest in companies to do things differently, I think, is what's going to matter.
Well, you mentioned mobile. My off-the-cuff reaction to that, and I know I've said this before, and this might just be my own take, but if you think about the rise of mobile, when you think about the iPhone when that came out, you had the things that you could immediately see as, oh, this is going to be possible. But those, second order, third order things, like we never would have even thought of what would be possible at the moment. To your point, like you've got to get through the tranches a little bit to see what's possible in the next wave.
Yeah. Well, and then I think it's hard to envision a world before March 2020 as well. How much was mobile? Mobile had been around for 12, but iPhone came out in 2007. And so you're thinking about, you almost said 10 to 15 years of mobile advancement, but it took COVID that completely changed the way that we did everything to, I think, really usher the full potential. Whether we got there or not, I don't know. But it is interesting to think about that too, of like, what are the forces that require you to change?
Yeah. My other thought, and I'm flipping this back on you because I'm curious to know what you think about this, but some of what you're just mentioning around, hey, we've gotten through, let's call it the low-hanging fruit of task automation. But you're pushing for, I want companies to be thinking about almost the game theory of like, how are their competitors going to react? How are they going to react to that? Like, do you think companies writ large are able to do that?
Yeah,
I'm not leading you to that.
No, I know. It's an interesting question when you think about which is why even like the market trend, the fact that we've been saying for how many quarters in a row now that, the market's at the all-time high, something's going to happen, recession fears for going on probably, I don't know, 8-10 quarters at this point, right? Is 3% inflation the new inflation for the US? All these questions, I don't know, but I think that maybe that's where it's possible that a smaller entrant, someone who's more nimble, potentially a private company, private equity, there's tons of money available, that they have a little bit more runway to figure it out. I think, public companies, the hamster wheel is spinning probably about as fast as it possibly can right now. And so there's not a lot of moment to catch your breath, so I think that becomes, again, well, how do you intentionally work through that? Obviously we're heading, it sounds crazy, election day is a couple weeks away, and start to think about just the impact of a year out from elections. Again, that starts, government's been shut down for the longest time ever. So I mean, it's just an interesting season of like, what is real anymore? I don't know what is and what's not. So I think so in that moment, I think companies, if you believe that things are maybe are artificially inflated, or you think that you're at a moment of where things are seeming like, hey, change is going to occur, could be negative, could be positive, I think companies got to be bold. And so how you do that, how you carve that out, that's why they get paid the big bucks in their chairs. But I do think that again, for me, I feel like there is this change this fall between companies that are really looking at how do you reevaluate your business? I mean, just even if you think about this podcast 6 months ago, we're talking about a company's going to create their own models. Are they going to do this? Where are they going to be at? Where's the edge? All this stuff. I think a lot of that has been, someone defined. I mean, if you have a competitive advantage that makes you have that type of information, you'll carve that out in your own space. But there's going to be certain providers, certain size that's going to make sense for them to make those investments. I think for most firms, though, they're going to be buyers of technology and they're going to use it for different ways. I think that, so now it's a little bit less on hardware, software models and more around how do you use that data differently? How do you work through that? And so I think that, I guess my answer is I think companies are going to have to find a way to carve it out. And I think the risk to not changing right now might be greater than in the last number of years. And I think we're probably still in an 5 years out of COVID, it's probably the normal cycles. I mean, just one in the US, the whole EV change. Right? I mean, think the whole industry was driven on something that's completely changing. So, what are the other industries like that where you thought again, use Gretzky, where you thought the puck was going, you wake up and the game's changed again, and and again, they run the risk it'll change again 3 years from now. But it's just I think companies have to be focused on what you do. I mean, I know for us, I'm really wrestling with not that we need to do better systems and processes and all those. We got to always have to get better at that. But I want us to be thinking about things differently. It's almost like the hedge fund portfolio of like, we need to be living in the 10% portfolio right now that's where the future is going to come from, not just optimizing the original 90.
Well, I mean, it's so interesting you say that. The question of, hey, you think where the puck is going, and then it changes on you. I've had that thought about AI in general. And I mean, it goes right back to your hedge comment, but we already see places where there is growing backlash. I mean, I think that is no surprise, but I saw one this weekend that was, I forgot who, but somebody had dropped a video kind of touting, hey, here's what's going to become possible with the use of AI in video game development. Did you see this? Is that why you're smirking?
No, but I'm thinking of a different example, but go ahead.
But it was, I mean, and then the point of the story is the clip got just utterly destroyed on the internet, and everyone was pointing out like everything wrong with it of, the subway was on the street, not on the tracks. And there were, obviously the text wasn't working or wasn't legible. And, the rifles they were using in this faux game were shooting all kinds of different ammunition. Anyways, the point is, and I don't know if this is where you meant to go or not, but I've been wrestling with, I mean, what do we do if that changes? Like, we think we know where this AI trajectory is going. What if that takes a hard left? What do we do when it takes a hard left?
Yeah. I mean,
I was thinking more of the example of like when, the video creation tied to audio became a thing. It's like, oh, we're going to have world leaders declaring war and all these other things. But really all we got was Abraham Lincoln playing basketball and retiring in that direction,
Yeah.
But I wonder if that's where the opportunity is now, where, if you think about, and I don't know how you do this, but you think about what would be just radically different about your business, where instead of it just being around, I would imagine annual planning processes or kind of innovation processes for the last couple of years have been really around. You had, 24 to 36 months post-COVID of just kind of, that rapid acceleration of that. You've had if in the U.S. economy, you had very limited M&A activity or coming out of the end of the Biden administration. You've got now all the rise of AI. So I think it's actually a chance now to really think about business differently. And cost of capital is somewhat stabilized. It'll be interesting to see what that plays, what that where that materializes. I hope that the geopolitical environment starts to, is more, a little bit more stabilized, at the end of this year than it was, I think, at the beginning of the year. But like, so, I mean, I think companies now really going back in and say, okay, what do we think we're going to look like 2-3 years now? Where should we be making that investment? I mean, again, one thing that's kind of nice from a capital allocation or from we know that everything's going to require better data. So, that's somewhat of a true north, I think, for companies to be able to work through. How do you do that? Now, how people access data, how systems access data, that's going to be probably really change. How do you keep it secure? Like, those things are going to be really interesting. But yeah, I think it's going to be, other moments of time like this where you've had huge significance. If you've seen probably interesting mashups of companies, I think that could be interesting. How do you have kind of not just acceleration plays when it comes to M&A, but maybe changing completely the way things get done. I think that it's going to be interesting from a workforce perspective. We continue to see, kind of white collar workers that are getting out, kind of displaced, and I think that will continue. So I think, I think it's going to be interesting. Just, you're seeing reduction in a lot of the still more, task-driven roles that are in the back office. But,
Sure.
I think it's possible that your legal functions, your finance functions, and a lot of things where you've got a lot of people, that those are going to look radically different. And, which, we were talking about schooling before we started recording, like, good plug for the U.S. economy to get better at STEM in terms of where we are schooling. But I mean, I think that's, it's going to be an interesting element of like, where would you invest? And then, what is the relationship with the customer going to be? Where, I think that's continuing to change too. Who owns the customer? Where is that at? Where do you going to have a direct relationship with your customer, which I think has been for probably the last 20 years, really onset of mobile, and has been, that's been the mantra. We have to understand and have this connection with our customer that's more large. Well, will that change in AI to where it's more around your partners, or it's around how you interact? I think that could be interesting.
It's possible, yeah.
That it's, it's less about, or, how you interact with your customer might be different. So I think those are some of the things that I'd be thinking about. I think for many companies continuing to go towards, I don't think this is just solely in professional services, although it's very much in professional services, but driving towards outcomes versus just time.
Sure.
I think that's been a desired change for a long time, but I think time is relative now in terms of the way that AI allows things to change. I mean, again, if you assume everyone has got the same acceleration plays that are happening, so therefore you can't work faster, the tools are going to help level up the skills. So now you're going to have to think about how you partnered better. You have to think about how you do things differently. It's going to be, actually, I think for me, part of why I'm really excited right now is that it's actually a really fun moment to be a company or a person who tends to live outside the lines, because you're going to have to be thinking creatively around how you do things differently versus just wash, rinse, and repeat.
That's a beautiful opening to where I was going to go next, Kevin, in the sense of this human-centered approach. I mean, it seems like, good example, when you go on any sort of public transit or you're in an airport, wherever, everybody's just looking down at their phone. Nobody's talking to each other. We seem to have lost that connection point over the past, 10 or so years since the invention of the smartphone. And then from the business world, I saw it firsthand of when I first entered the business world. You'd go on sales meetings at a golf course, you'd go to lunches because you had that time, because there wasn't as much technology to do the business. It was you having to go out and manually per se do it. And then all of a sudden we got access to all this tech, but the tech that we had access to required a lot of manual input and data entry, et cetera, et cetera. And so not as much time for that, face-to-face time with clients or, whoever you're working with. And I feel like for me, the thing that I see that could really make a company stand out these days is the soft skill component of, if everybody's using the same tech, if everybody has kind of that same acceleration point, to your point, Kevin, how do we as humans fit in to be those differentiators? And I think, if you can take 8 hours worth of work that you're supposed to do today, and with the tools that you have access to, dwindle that down to 3 or 4, well, then that potentially gives you more time to, either whether it's be on site with a client or working with a partner, over the phone. It just seems like it opens up more possibility to kind of reestablish that connection within the workforce, internally and externally, to to have that opportunity to be a differentiator? I don't know. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think there's two things there, or at least there's two thoughts that sparked. So I'll preface this by saying I know that I go to Google a lot, but I'm going to go to Google. Do you remember like 10 years ago, they did Project Aristotle, which was their look at what are the things that make a high-performing team? I don't remember everything on the list, but I remember the number one thing was psychological safety, which I think is interesting. I mean, because this is Google, right? So like, it wasn't the use of technology or access to the best technology or access to the best data that made the highest performing teams. It was the notion of, I have the environment on a team where I feel safe enough to ask questions and admit what I don't know and challenge your point of view and all of those things. I say that to say I think where you were going, Ryan, I think there's absolutely a human element at play here, and I don't think that will change as much as the technology changes. I do think then there's a separate thing, which is, okay, park the human element for just a sec. There's still the question of, where do you focus your attention? Like, what do you do with AI that's going to be the biggest driver of difference for you as a company? And that's maybe a separate thing to dig into, but I'm curious to know what you think.
My build on that, which is not a dodge from what I think, is I wrestle a lot with the classical generational changes in the workforce. And yeah, I think, generally especially as I've get more experience and get closer to grumpy old man or sage stage, depending on which day it is, in looking and saying, historically, you look at every upcoming generation and you'd say, hey, we need to adapt our workforce and we need to adapt the way we work to be able to make this. And I'm sure every single person who's been in the more latter stage of their careers has said, do we need to change? Should we change how it works? That I fundamentally believe, that we should always change and evolve with our workforce. But I'm struggling right now with, is that actually true for this stage? Because I take the Aristotle studies of 10 years ago. There's multiple studies right now around happiness, particularly in your early generations, or your emerging generations, and like this disconnect between happiness, safety, work ethic, desires. There's this huge, we're seeing a real chasm for the first time, I think, in maybe in multiple generations of the American dream, like probably coming post World War II, and kind of that first real everyone coming off the farm, in this, to where the desires and the belief that one generation will exceed the next is really changed. And so as a company, well, what do you do with that information? Like, do you actually, hey, even from us, we're a young company, young employees, right? So, if your workforce now fundamentally is a different view on what it means to work, like, and you've got the same moment, you have all these tools that has taken acceleration into at hyperscale. Do you change your business to be able to support young employees and customers and consumers that maybe have a different perspective, or do you actually double down on a certain type of skill set and assume you're going to use the tools, which I find myself leaning towards that when I want to be leaning back towards we should evolve to really addressing our company and our employees where they're at. But I think, to me, then going back to the specific question, I think there is more opportunity for human ingenuity and creativity and spark, all those things that come that make us alive, in my opinion. How we work together, how we think about that, how we get together in whiteboards and addressing all this different stuff. I think that in your craft right now, innovation, whether we use classical innovation or whatever else, is more important than maybe in the last 10 to 15 years of agile and sprints and everything else that's kind of ushered into what your craft is. And I actually think that that's going to be why companies succeed, is they find, you and I both like science fiction, maybe you a little bit more than I do, but you think about the typical dystopian view in science fiction is mundane drudgery, right? Everyone does. That's typical. What's horrible society looks like. We're in a moment where there's a lot of people that believe that that's what it's like. So, if you're a company where you take a different approach, or just an individual, you take a different approach, like, this is a great time to be alive, to think and how you work through that, and actually believe that you can make a change. You can have access to all these tools and techniques and, things that will make it easier, which I think you do. and actually can take that and change. I think finding people that have that mindset is more important. I mean, you talk about Google. I mean, obviously you were one of the early employees at Google. You were there at the heyday of some of those initial innovation. I mean, my guess, and we've talked about this before, but my guess is that everyone in that company was, I mean, it was the excitement of changing what you were doing across every single thing. Some of the smartest and brightest people in coming out of university at that moment, all together of like, we can do things different. Like, I want companies to be that, which, that is different. I mean, going back to, one of the articles that came out, it was a very interesting weekend on Wall Street Journal in terms of all over the board on what they were talking about. But I think it was interesting around the particular article about the number of hours that people in AI companies are working right now.
Yes.
Like, we're seeing people that are at the forefront of what's going on are working in ways that we've not seen in probably 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And I think, so this is where I think right now, fortune goes to the bold more so than probably any moment in the last 10, 15 years, in my opinion.
I don't disagree with that. That article actually was really interesting for a lot of reasons, but I'm going to say my challenge back to you. I don't mean this as a challenge, but I think what's interesting about what you're mentioning is what's different now in my mind from past is the degree to which people feel agency. Meaning, I think you have a whole swath, and I know this is getting really meta, but I think you have a whole swath of workers, particularly probably at certain generations, that feel like, hey, I could put in as much as I want, but I'm not going to get the outcome that I want. Like, I'm not actually going to drive any change. Therefore, I'm going to go the opposite direction.
I know. So does that create competitive advantage for companies? That's my question. That's what I'm wrestling with.
Yeah.
Is that instead of, do you try to change the hearts and minds of people? Do you avoid taking advantage of people? Because I think that's the risk, right? If the classical people who work more and harder. So I don't know. And again, just the way I framed up my comments, am I just a grumpy old man who just looks at the younger generations and says that they don't understand? And I think it's different. I think there's something more broader than just simply generational differences. I think there's a fundamental idea of, what is your perspective? Are you excited about what we're doing or not?
Right.
I think this is one of the things of society. I mean, we see it with our teenage kids or soon to be teenage kids. Like, they're buried in a screen most of their day. Like, they have more entertainment options than ever, and they're not having to necessarily be creative in that construct of what that is as well. Think about so I just don't know where this is. I mean, this is society. This is not just a issue that we're facing with employees or with our kids. I mean, this is society questions around where this goes, and
It is.
And then how do you take advantage of that in a positive sense? How do you encourage? I think it's a moment that as pace accelerates, it's actually a moment where reflection is really important to kind of where I feel like we're at a bit of an inflection point of where you're going to go, particularly now as you start to say, hey, this stuff could really start to change in ways that are really beneficial. I think about all the changes that you're seeing already in medicine, and I think there's an opportunity with all the innovations that are going on to really change people's lives for the positive. But what happens if we can change people's lives for the positive and they don't want life there?
Yeah.
It's a different problem.
Yeah, no, it is. Well, and I mean, I guess my slightly more optimistic spin on where you're going is, how do we engender that attitude in our people?
Yes. And I think, and how do we encourage people to get excited about, the change, and it's not just negative spin. I'm going to spend the rest of my week flying across the country, trying to encourage our team, and and really wanting to do that in a way that's authentic and about the excitement of what's available to us, and not ignoring the challenges. I mean, there's lots of challenges, whether it be in our company, other places. I mean, so how do you play in this tension of like, yeah, there's a lot of realities that stink and we want to get those better, but the same token, there's so many cool things. And I think part of what success is how you handle the tension between those two elements, and which I think has always been that tension through all the history of time. It's just the consequences of them are different. I eat or I don't eat is different than, I get, some of the things that we're faced today are the basic fundamentals are for most of our team and are being met. So that's not the issue that people are faced with.
Well, I know Ryan's going to ask us for takeaways in a minute at least, so I'll go there already for one of them. But to me, if I follow your train of logic, it all comes back to there's got to be more than you telling people to get excited about this. And I mean that in the nicest way. I mean, they have to have their hands on it. They have to see it for themselves, which to me, so much of this comes back to go to Mark Cuban, because we all love Mark Cuban around Dallas. He didn't make the trade, so we're good.
Yeah.
He was on record saying to his kids, hey, if you have any spare time, you need to go spend your spare time learning as many of the AI tools as you can. The idea being, you may never be an engineer, but if you understand them, if you know how to work with them, then when you join the workforce, you're going to have, a leg up, but more importantly, you're going to be able to help your company and your colleagues integrate the technology. To me, that's the most important bit, because if people are going to understand what's possible, if they're going to kind of catch the vision for the optimism, they've got to have the hands-on experience with the technology to understand what actually is possible, for what it's worth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that leads naturally goes back to this. I mean, finding people that are hungry, that want to learn, that are curious, whether it be because that's how they naturally are, they are raised that way, or because they desire. I mean, I think there's, for a long time, people equated that work ethic and interest with, it's really just changing lives, well, their own life, their own story, where they're at, that may be a less of an issue, at least for the average American today. I hope that's still part of the American immigrant story. But I think that speaks into what we need to be able to be teaching our kids, right? It's really how you learn, why you learn, what you do. Again, I had a chance to hear Cuban speak a couple weeks ago, and he was talking about one of his ventures, and it was just really fascinating. Some of his stuff he's doing in healthcare to really kind of buck the system, and having huge impacts on certain industries, but doing it very technology forward.
Yeah.
And doing it with a lot of automation and not very many people, and the impact that a company could have today could be, it just looks different. The footprint looks different. And so I think, how do your employees understand that? How do you work through that? Again, I think for us, how do we think about valuing people that think differently, valuing people that look at problems differently. I think it's going to be interesting around. So really exciting for, I think, innovation shops, firms that have, either make their money by doing similar things, or, supporting that, kind of the acceleration. There's a little window of that, but I think it's going to be, that's where outcome-based thinkings, it'll be a little scary for a lot of firms to go through that transition. There's going to be winners and losers in that. There always are. But it's more honest. Right, that's the one I like about. I mean, we either help companies succeed or fail, and you have a chance to share in that, or as a company yourself, you're able to work through that. And I think that, which again, I think the good news is, you talked before about, it always goes back to the back a little bit, and it does. I mean,
it's competitive advantage.
Competitive advantage. It's people looking at things, destructive capitalism, all these different elements. The themes are still there. It's just, I think it's going to be who takes advantage of that, who puts that into your DNA. Going back to the idea of encouraging our teams. I want to encourage our teams to do it differently, think about it differently. What you control, versus what you can't control. You can control how you learn, how quickly you incorporate those in, how you change. You can control your relationships with your people, our clients, your teammates. A lot of things you can't control, and that's not just our story. That's in any type of stories. I mean, there's a lot of, so I think that the more you find employees that get excitement in that, in excitement of how you do that, I think, in our particular business, people that are curious, that want to work together with people, I think that's a great start. I think that's probably the core elements of that, and I think that will lead to very, very bullish on the success of that. I think if, there's more desire for repetitiveness or isolation, again, I'm using negative tones. I don't mean that to have that mean if you desire those things, but I think that is less interesting. And so, I think it's going to be I do think there's going to be a moment though, where this clash between leisure or desire for happiness is I can do whatever I want, with this destructive capitalism perspective that says doing whatever you want doesn't necessarily work. I mean, you got to be, and so I don't know where that tension is going to be. And we get a chance to be in the middle of it. I'm super excited about that. I think this next few years are going to be really groundbreaking and changing. And I want our firm and to be in a company that wants to do change and work through that, and and working through all the constraints that you have associated with that. But I think the more we operate with that tenor, and the more that we encourage people to have that view, the more successful individual will be. I think more successful our clients, and then ultimately we will be. Whether we can do that, how that plays out, how do you work through that? I mean, again, everyone's got constraints. So yeah, it's part of the leadership and management is to work through constraints. But I think you can give that vision for people, which then I think also leads to people having great enjoyment in life. I mean, you do it right. There should be time for to watch your version of whatever you want to watch, and have that ability to do that. But I don't know. I think it's I think it's
no, I love it. Well, and I think going back to the more things change, the more they're the same. That my takeaway from what you're just saying is the onus is on us then to go create the environments where our people feel the freedom to experiment and to innovate and to drive the change that we want to see them drive.
And then ultimately also continue to find people that want to do that too.
Yes.
And that is a bit of a selection issue. And I understand that's,
Sure.
that's, you can only motivate, but I do think the traits that have made people move forward are very consistent. So
any other final thoughts? I think we could go on this all day. There's a whole nother level that I want to explore, but we're going to need more time to do that. So we'll save that one for another episode. A little tease there for you.
It's so easy just to get caught in doing what incremental change, doing what you did before, treating stuff, the process. And I think that's what gets me so excited right now, is that I think if you just do what you did before a little bit better, that's going to lead to failure. And I actually think so the pace of failure, which requires change and opportunity, is greater than it has in maybe any time, at least in the last, at least for me, it's like a couple different business cycles. And so I think that's an interesting element of like that, what is the opportunity cost of being meek or just trying to, going back annual planning, right? What do you typically do? You start with last year's and you add it by a certain percentage point. That's, well, why do people do that? Well, because it's always been done that way. It's easy. It protects you. You're not too bold. And I think, how do you find ways in your companies to, play that game as appropriate, but also, seek those chances? And again, that's why I go back to a bit of the kind of the portfolio theory of like, you've got, most of your is going to be run the course, do that, but make sure you spend a lot of time and energy thinking about the hedges. And sometimes hedges are just kind of almost like absent-minded. But I actually think now I would encourage our clients, our listeners, and our companies, like as leaders, focus more on that hedge and then the changes, and delegate running the majority of the business. I think the change is going to happen in kind of that area of innovation, which is going to drive the next 10 years versus just continuing the same course.
Oh, I love that. I really liked the way that you framed it earlier, and I forgot the exact wording, but the idea that in this moment, the cost of not doing something is greater than the cost of doing something that might be wrong. I think that's great.
To make some money.
Do something. Anything. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I think this was really good discussion today. I think we got some really good ones dialed up for the next couple of episodes. So for myself, Ryan, for Jake, for Kevin, thank y'all so much for tuning in. This has been another edition of Pure Signal, reminding you to be curious and be bold.